Plant pathogens are absolutely fascinating to me because they cause so many problems in our gardens and our agricultural fields and stuff, but they're also so very important. You know, they help us make beer, they help us make cheese. I mean, these are just fermented things, but then also our soils are super dependent on fungus to cycle all those nutrients. Bacteria help break down all kinds of different things. So they're absolutely vital to what we're doing and how we live, but then they're also so detrimental, or can be so detrimental, to different plants in our gardens. Thank you so much for watching this video series all about pest management and disease management. I really hope that you're enjoying it. I just wanted to let you know that this series is actually just a really small section of a much broader course all about gardening. Everything from, how to select seeds and planting seeds all the way up to harvest and kind of just everything in between. And so if this sounds like something you're interested in and really broadening your understanding in gardening, I'm going to place a link below in the description, and this will bring you to the Wild Abundance Gardening School in North Carolina. And we have a sliding scale payment system for the whole course, so you can pay what you can afford in order to have access to this wealth of knowledge. There are 4 types of pathogens, or 4 groups of pathogens that attack plants. So you have your fungus, your bacteria, your viruses, and then your oomycetes. And I'm going to go into each one of these in a little bit more detail, so then you can differentiate them if you start to see problems in your garden. Fungus is one of my favorite plant pathogens, not only because fungus is so vital in all of the ecological systems, but mushrooms are also really delicious. I absolutely love mushrooms. Now, we all have seen mushrooms in the grocery store or on our pizza. Some people love them, some people don't like them very much. But mushrooms are just one tiny little part of a fungus. So if you think of a tomato plant with, say, 1 cherry tomato on top of this huge tomato plant, well, the mushroom is kind of like that cherry tomato. If you just saw a cherry tomato, you wouldn't see the huge plant and all the root system that it took to grow that cherry tomato. So think of this just like with the mushroom. There's a whole supporting structure that made that mushroom. Now, this supporting structure is called mycelium. And mycelium snakes all through our soils and onto plants and all over, and that is what collects all that nutrition and the energy in order to build the mushroom, which is really just the reproductive structure of this fungus. Now, this is important because mycelium is often what we see when we look at a plant leaf and we see that it has a problem. So you may look at, say, a rose leaf and you see kind of a white fuzzy coating on it. Well, this is the mycelium from that fungus as it's exploring around and stealing energy from the leaf. And that's why fungus is a pathogen, is because that mycelium kind of penetrates into the leaf and takes energy from the plant, and so the plant can't continue, just doing its own thing, producing the fruit or whatever that we want to eat. Some examples of fungal diseases that we might see in our gardens, like the rose, powdery mildew. So powdery mildew is a fungus that gets on the leaves, and once that mycelium is growing all through the leaves, you're just slowly taking energy from the plant. And if you look on the top side of the leaf, oftentimes you may see, it starts to get kind of yellow. It doesn't look very healthy. And that's because, it really is just stealing energy from the plant. Another common disease that we see a lot here in the South is southern blight. Southern blight, again, is caused by a fungus that gets on the stem and gets into the plant, and it actually causes the plant to wilt because that fungus is all inside of that stem, and then the plant will usually die. And you'll see this mycelium growing all around the base of the plant as the fungus goes through its life cycle. I think when most people hear the term bacteria, they think of, when they get a cut, we're all told, oh, wash your wound, put antibiotic ointment on it, take care of it, put a Band-Aid on it, otherwise you're going to get an infection. And so what this is usually warning us against is getting bacteria into that wound. And the reason why bacteria is such a problem is because bacteria reproduces incredibly fast. I'm talking faster than aphids. I know, crazy. So bacteria reproduces so fast that it just overwhelms the system. So this is the problem in humans as well as plants. So if a plant gets a bacterial infection, what it does is it overwhelms everything so much. We can see this in our gardens when sometimes we see a plant wilt really fast and it has plenty of water, it looks like it's fine, the soil is healthy, but then the plant just all of a sudden wilts. And so this can happen when the bacteria gets in that plant and it just reproduces so fast and builds so fast, it literally plugs all those water moving elements inside that stem, and then the plant can't do anything. It can't move water around, it can't move nutrition around, and so then the plant wilts and will usually die if it gets a bacterial infection. An example of this that you might see in your garden is pith necrosis in tomatoes. And that's exactly, if you look at the name, pith, so the center of the plant, necrosis, so it's dying. And this is exactly what happens. The bacteria gets in the stem, kills it, and then the plant will start to wilt. And actually, I was out this year looking at someone's tomatoes plants that had problems. And what you see is as the stem starts to die, the plant starts to panic. And what it'll do is it'll put out these aerial roots. They're called adventitious roots because they're not growing in the soil, they're growing up above the ground. And what these roots are trying to do is they're trying to get water because the stem is no longer able to move water. So it's like, oh no, put out roots, see what I can find. And this ultimately means that the plant will usually die. But if you didn't know that the stem was infected, well, you would think, oh, I just need to water my plants more, they're getting wilted. Another example of this kind of overwhelming bacterial infection is fire blight. If you have, say, some apple or pear trees on your property or around your garden, you might notice you get these flagging, they call them flagging branches, where kind of the last maybe 6 to 8 inches of the branch just kind of turns orange and dies. And this is exactly the same thing. The bacteria is plugging up those xylem, that inner pith of the plant, and it's just kind of wilting and dying. So that's why you get what's called fire blight. It is important to say that bacteria doesn't always cause these wilting and death symptoms. You can also get bacteria that's spread around by raindrops, and you can get bacterial speck or bacterial spot on tomato leaves. These little tiny indentations and dead spots on leaves, it can get on the fruit. And this is caused by a bacteria. It often doesn't kill the plant, but you'll lose leaves, you may lose fruit. But again, bacteria can be really problematic because of how fast it's dividing and how fast it's reproducing to take advantage of this nutrients that it found. So I'm filming this in the middle of maybe the middle, I don't know, of the 2020 global pandemic. And this whole thing is caused by a virus. Now, interestingly enough, viruses, they're wreaking havoc on our world. Well, they also wreak havoc or can wreak havoc on plants as well. Now, viruses, I'm sure everyone is much more aware of viruses, trying to educate yourself about this COVID-19 virus or this coronavirus. And a lot of that information that you've learned about this coronavirus can also be applied to plant viruses. So viruses are these little tiny bundles of usually DNA, and they're wrapped in kind of this hard outer shell. Now, how they work is once that gets into a plant, they kind of hijack the machinery of the plant, and they say, okay, you're producing me now, you're not gonna make, the chlorophyll you need for your leaves. And so this, again, is kind of stealing nutrients from the plant, and the plant won't, grow normally. And this is important when we're trying to diagnose, say, a virus versus something else. Because these viruses are stealing the DNA, oftentimes plants with viruses kind of get weird symptoms on. The leaves kind of maybe don't divide properly. They're kind of like, oh, that's a really weird looking leaf. Or you can get a viral mottle, which is kind of just this very distinct looking leaf pattern. So how the virus is hijacking the system of the plant shows how the plant has symptoms. Viruses are very specific to specific species of plants because they do depend on kind of, similar genetic material or similar DNA in order to reproduce itself. So when you're trying to prevent viruses from being in your garden, it's important to buy virus-free material. So don't start with something that already has a disease, but then also to keep in mind that maybe plants in the same species could get the same virus. For instance, if you planted a potato, which is in the nightshade family, next to a tomato, which is also in the nightshade family, you could probably get some similar diseases, similar viruses that would go between them. So maybe it's not a good idea to plant those right next to each other. Maybe give them a little bit of space so the virus, if one of them has it, won't affect both things. Now, viruses can also be moved around by insects. So it's important that when we do our pest management and we understand what we're trying to prevent, that we take into account that maybe some insects are moving virus into our garden. So if you have, you buy all material that's virus free, but then you start to see a virus, well, possibly it could be coming from insects. The last group of plant pathogens is the Oomycetes. Oomycetes are this weird little group of plant pathogens that are often called water molds. And for a long time, scientists thought that they were actually just kind of like simpler and dumber fungi. But now that we've done a lot more genetic testing, we've actually realized that Oomycetes are nothing like fungi. Fungi is actually closer to a human evolutionarily compared to an oomycete, which is way closer to like an algae or a plant. So oomycetes can be a really important plant pathogen because of all of the oomycetes that we know in the entire world, 60% of them comprise plant pathogens. Now think of this in the context of, say, like bacteria. The entire world's covered in bacteria. There's bacteria all over the place. And like a tiny little percentage of that causes problems for plants. Whereas oomycetes, 60% of them are working on just trying to kill plants. So you may not know that you actually know what an oomycete is because, the word oomycete's not really used very often. But the potato famine in the 1800s in Ireland, that was caused by an oomycete. So that was late blight, which will also hit tomatoes and potatoes and a few other things. So you kind of already know that, these can be a problem. I mean, the potato famine was huge, and they can cause a lot of other problems in our gardens. When you are trying to control oomycetes, a really important thing to know about them is that they love water. They're very mobile in water. And this is why if you're growing spinach in a greenhouse, and you might see, say you're irrigating from overhead and you've got all this water moving around, you might see lots of downy mildew develop or lots of problems because there's water everywhere. These little oomycetes are kind of just cruising around. Remember, they're called water molds. They love the water. So these are things that we can keep in mind when we get into this next section where we're talking about how to control all of these problems.